Welcome back to the garage, and it's time for another episode of Token Teardown. If you're new here, this is the show where we bring crypto projects into the bay, put them on the lift, and break down what they're actually built on. Not the hype, not the headlines, but the engineering underneath. And today on the lift is Aethir, ticker ATH. This one is a viewer request, which means we don't go easy, we go thorough. The real question we're answering today is simple. Is ATH the Porsche Taycan Turbo S of crypto? Quiet, software-driven, instant torque, built for the future? Or is it just a polished idea that hasn't proven itself under real load yet? Because in this garage, we don't judge projects by vibes, Twitter threads, or green candles. We judge by structure, execution, and whether the system actually works. Before we go any further, we need to give proper credit. A huge shout out to Christian XXX for taking the time to read the white paper, check the GitHub commits, and do the real research that makes these teardowns possible. That work matters. Now, real quick, make sure you smash the like, hit the follow, and share this with your fellow crypto bros. And yes, even your buddy from the gym, the one still rocking his Bored Ape shirt every workout, and still a little salty about a few NFTs he picked up last cycle. ATH is quiet, ATH is ambitious, and ATH is aiming straight at AI infrastructure and decentralized compute, one of the most important battlegrounds in crypto right now. So let's clear the lift, put on the gloves, and take a real look at what's underneath. Let's get to work. Before we touch the technology, before we talk tokens, before we start popping the hood, we need to meet the pit crew. Because no matter how fast a car looks on the outside, if the crew building it doesn't know what they're doing, that thing isn't finishing a race. And Aethir wasn't built by anonymous avatars or first-time builders chasing whatever narrative is hot this cycle. This was put together by operators who've already worked on machines that had to stay running under real pressure. At the center of it is Mark Ryden, co-founder, the guy thinking about strategy and scale. He's focused on how systems go from idea to deployment, how supply actually gets sourced, and how platforms grow once real customers start depending on them. That matters here, because coordinating GPU supply at scale isn't a whiteboard problem. It's an execution problem. You either deliver horsepower when someone hits the pedal, or you get left on the side of the track. Alongside him is Daniel Wang, also a co-founder, with deep experience in gaming platforms and large-scale ecosystems, including senior roles tied to Riot Games' China operations. Gaming infrastructure is unforgiving. If latency spikes or servers go down, users don't complain, they leave. Daniel's background lives right where performance, scale, and massive user demand collide. On the technical side, Kyle Okamoto steps in as CTO, bringing enterprise and telecom infrastructure experience. This is the kind of background you want when you're building something that has to stay online nonstop, handle heavy traffic, and operate in the real world, not just in perfect lab conditions. Behind them is a growing engineering and operations team built like a proper pit crew. Engineers turning the wrenches, infrastructure specialists watching the gauges, operators making sure nothing overheats mid-race. They didn't stack the garage with influencers and hype men. They scaled deliberately with people who keep systems running. That tells you everything about what kind of build this is. This isn't a team here for a launch lap and a victory photo. It's a crew trying to build something that can go the distance. And now that we know who's in the pit lane, it's time to look at the car itself and understand what problem they're actually trying to solve. What Aethir is really doing. At its core, Aethir exists because the horsepower in this industry is parked in the wrong garages. Right now, the most powerful GPUs in the world are locked up by a small group of massive providers. If you want access, you pay premium prices, sign long contracts, and hope there's availability when you actually need it. Meanwhile, all over the world, there are high-end machines sitting in garages, engines warm, tanks full, not being driven anywhere near their limit. That's wasted performance. Aethir was built to fix that imbalance. The idea is simple. Take professional-grade GPU operators from around the world and connect them into one coordinated network so builders can tap into that power on demand. Instead of buying the whole car, you rent the horsepower for the laps you actually need. For developers, that means lower upfront costs and no waiting months for delivery. For GPU owners, it means machines that were idling now earn every time they're put on track. And for the network, utilization improves and pricing becomes more competitive. The important thing to understand is that Aethir is not trying to replace the big cloud providers overnight. It's not racing them head-on down the straightaway. It's targeting the corners they're slow in. Workloads where flexibility matters, where performance has to show up instantly, and where locking yourself into long-term capacity makes no sense. That includes AI inference, burst model training, and cloud gaming. These are environments where demand spikes without warning, and latency decides whether you win or spin out. This isn't about renting basic compute. It's about coordinating serious infrastructure so power shows up exactly when you hit the accelerator. Aethir positions itself as the access layer, not the destination. You don't rebuild your entire stack. You just plug in, hit go, and let the network route the power. And now that we understand what problem Aethir is solving, it's time to look at how that power actually moves through the system once the green light hits. How Aethir works. Aethir is not a blockchain, and it's not trying to compete with existing chains. It's more like the control system that sits above the engine bay, telling all the parts when to fire and how hard to push. It coordinates compute, verification, and settlement without trying to rebuild the engine itself. That distinction matters, because running AI workloads directly on-chain would be like trying to race a supercar through city traffic. Slow, expensive, and completely impractical. Aethir is built around how high-performance computing actually works in the real world. The system runs on three core roles. First are the compute providers. These are professional GPU operators supplying the hardware. Think of them as the engines. Their job is simple: deliver the horsepower that was requested, stay online, and get paid. If performance drops or jobs fail, the payout drops with it. No free rides.
These are the inspectors in the pit lane, making sure the engine actually delivered what the dash says it did. They monitor accuracy, uptime, and reliability. If a provider cuts corners, it gets flagged. This layer exists because in a distributed system, trust isn't assumed, it's verified. Third are the indexers. They're the traffic controllers. They route jobs to available GPUs, balance supply and demand, and keep everything moving smoothly as conditions change. Most of the heavy lifting happens off-chain, where GPUs can run at full speed without extra drag. The blockchain layer is there for settlement, enforcement, and accountability, not raw horsepower. That design keeps latency low, costs manageable, and scaling realistic. When demand spikes, jobs get rerouted. When supply tightens, incentives adjust. And when someone doesn't meet expectations, penalties kick in automatically. The end result is a system that behaves like real infrastructure, not a speculative toy.
It prioritizes reliability, coordination, and performance over experimentation. And now that we understand how the machine actually runs, the next question is whether the fuel powering it is built to last. How Aethir is positioned to scale. Now that we understand how Aethir works mechanically, the real question becomes how this thing behaves once it leaves the test track and hits the real road. Aethir is built for builders and platforms that care about performance first, not tokens. When customers show up, they're not asked to learn crypto or manage wallets. They're not speculating. They're buying compute. Think of it like pulling into a performance shop and paying for horsepower, not worrying about how the engine was machined. That demand comes in through familiar business workflows, while the network handles settlement, incentives, and enforcement quietly in the background. That's a big deal because it lowers friction and lets Aether serve non-crypto native users without cutting corners on accountability. On the supply side, professional GPU operators plug in because performance is measured and paid for, not taken on faith. If the engine delivers, it gets rewarded. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
That alignment is what keeps this from turning into a hype-driven marketplace. It also matters to understand where this system is in its life cycle. Early on, coordination is tighter, like a race team keeping everything in the garage under close supervision to make sure nothing breaks. Over time, the strength of the model depends on opening the pit lane, expanding participation across providers, checkers, and coordinators, and letting control spread as usage grows. If that happens, the system gets stronger and more resilient. If it doesn't, scalability becomes the limiter. The takeaway is simple. Aether isn't trying to win by revving the engine loudest. It's trying to win by being dependable lap after lap. Customers pay for performance. Providers earn by delivering it. And the network exists to keep everything running in sync.
With that context in place, the next step is looking at the fuel itself and deciding whether the economics are built to support a long race instead of a short sprint. Now, don't let tokenomics confuse you. It's just a fancy word for the fuel. It's how the system gets paid, how the engine stays running, and whether it can keep moving forward without blowing itself up. In Aethir's case, demand starts with customers paying for compute. These are developers and platforms buying performance, not tokens. They're pulling into the shop and paying for horsepower, not asking how the engine was cast. That demand usually comes in through normal business workflows, often handled in fiat, while the network handles settlement, incentives, and enforcement quietly in the background. That means ATH demand today is mostly indirect. The token isn't the product. It's the mechanism that keeps the engine honest. ATH is used by GPU providers, checkers, and coordinators who stake into the system and earn rewards for verified performance. Deliver what you promised, and you get paid. Early on, incentives matter because they help bootstrap supply and reliability. That's normal for infrastructure networks. Over time, the only way this works is if real usage grows and incentives become a smaller part of the equation. It's also important to understand supply timing. ATH still has scheduled unlocks ahead, which means price action can lag fundamentals as new supply enters the market. That doesn't break the model, but it does affect volatility and timing. Long term, everything comes down to one question. Can Aether transition from incentive-driven growth to demand-driven usage? If it can, staking demand rises and the economic engine stabilizes. If it can't, pressure builds. With the fuel system clear, the next step is looking at who else is on the track. Now that we understand the fuel, let's talk about the race. Aether isn't just competing with other crypto projects. Its real competition starts with centralized cloud providers that dominate GPU access today. These platforms offer scale and reliability, but they're expensive, rigid, and often unavailable when demand spikes. That creates an opening for alternatives that can deliver performance without long contracts or vendor lock-in. Inside crypto, there are other networks trying to solve pieces of the same problem. Some focus on rendering workloads. Some focus on aggressively aggregating GPUs for AI training. Others aim at general-purpose decentralized compute. Where Aether positions itself differently, it's coordination and reliability. It's not trying to win by being the cheapest or the loudest. It's trying to win by showing up every lap. That means Aether is not built for hobbyists or casual experimentation. It's aimed at AI teams, gaming platforms, and performance-sensitive builders who need compute to work the moment they hit go. These users don't care about narratives. They care about whether jobs finish on time and whether performance holds under load. From an adoption standpoint, Aether focuses on two things at the same time: professional GPU operators on the supply side, and real compute demand on the user side. That balance is what allows the network to behave like infrastructure instead of a speculative marketplace. If builders keep coming back and workloads keep running, the system strengthens. If they don't, nothing else matters. And that brings us to the part every real teardown has to include: the risks. Every real build has stress points, and Aethir is no exception. These risks aren't about scams or shortcuts. This isn't a shady body kit situation. This is about execution under load. The first pressure point is incentives. Early on, the network uses rewards to keep GPU providers plugged in. That works at the start, but incentives are like nitrous. Great for getting off the line, terrible if you need it just to keep cruising. If real demand doesn't scale fast enough, the system starts relying too heavily on token rewards just to keep engines online. That puts pressure on the fuel system and delays stabilization. The second risk is reliability at scale. Coordinating high-performance GPUs across a distributed network is hard. Latency, uptime, and consistency are everything here. If performance hiccups, even briefly, serious customers don't wait around to see if it fixes itself. They pull back into the centralized garage they already trust. The third risk is decentralization over time. Early coordination is tighter by design, like keeping a new race car under close supervision in the garage. But long-term strength comes from opening the pit lane. Providers, checkers, and coordinators need to broaden out. If control stays concentrated, resilience suffers. If decentralization expands successfully, the system becomes much harder to knock off the track. Competition is always pressing from the outside. Centralized cloud providers keep tuning their engines. Crisis shift. Capacity expands. Specialized GPU clouds keep getting better. If those alternatives get cheaper and easier, faster than Aethir improves coordination and reliability, the gap closes quickly. Now the most important part, the failure mode. If GPU providers unplug faster than real demand grows, the network loses momentum before it ever reaches escape velocity. If a major customer leaves during that phase, confidence takes a hit. And if that all happens while new token supply is entering the market, price action can drift far away from fundamentals. None of this means the project fails. These are execution risks, not red flags. The reassuring part is this: there are no signs of deception, no disappearing founders, no shortcuts that only work in a demo. These are the risks that come from trying to build real infrastructure, not from trying to sell hype. If execution holds, these stress points get absorbed like a well-tuned suspension. If execution slips, they turn into cracks. With the risks on the table, the next step is looking at the people around this build and whether the community fits the kind of machine Aethir is trying to become. Now, let's talk about the crowd around this thing, because every build attracts a certain type of driver. Aethir isn't pulling in meme racers, revving their engines at a stoplight, hoping someone notices. This feels more like a pit lane crowd. People watching lap times, checking tire wear, waiting to see if the car can actually finish a race instead of just looking fast in the parking lot. The community isn't small, but it's also not screaming every time price twitches. You don't see nonstop moon talk or daily hype cycles. What you see instead are people paying attention to deployments, partnerships, and whether the system is actually staying online under load. That's an important distinction. A loud crowd shows up for launches. A quiet crowd sticks around for execution. This kind of community doesn't panic at every bump in the road, but it also doesn't cheer if the engine starts knocking. They're watching consistency. Are builders still building? Are workloads still running? Are GPU operators still plugged in? If those answers stay yes, the signal stays strong. If the garage starts emptying out, that's your warning light. Community here isn't about vibes for vibes' sake. It's about whether people keep bringing the car back for another lap. And now that we've covered the build, the risks, and the people standing around the track, It's time to put some numbers on this thing and see what happens when it gets strapped to the dyno. Okay, now here we are. Everyone's favorite part, the moulin. And before we get into the numbers, you need to know this. All of the data you're about to hear comes straight from the garage head of technical analysis. That's Lulu. Now, let's talk numbers. Right now, ATH is trading at about 8/10 of a cent. That's sub-penny territory. At that price, the market cap sits roughly in the $140 to $150 million range, depending on the day. And we need to address the elephant in the garage. ATH already had a moment. The all-time high was just over 10 cents back in June of 2024. From that peak, price is down more than 90%. That tells us the market already tried to price this thing like it was fully race ready before it finished break-in. Now we're looking at it again, with more information and a lot less hype. So, let's walk through the scenarios. Scenario 1 is cruise control. The broader crypto market grows, Aethir keeps roughly the same market share, and nothing dramatic changes. In that case, ATH moves with the tide. No hero story, no disaster. Price works its way into the 1.5 to 2 cent range over time, which puts the market cap around $300 to $400 million. That's just the car staying on the road and doing what the market does. Scenario 2 is where the market catches some fire. AI demand continues to build, GPU access stays tight, and decentralized compute becomes a real narrative again. If Aethir picks up traction while the market expands, ATH can move into the 3 to 5 cent range. That implies a market cap between $600 million and about $1 billion. This is where perception starts to shift and people stop calling it a sub-penny token. Scenario 3 is the adoption breakthrough. This is where behavior changes. More real workloads, more repeat customers. Incentives matter less, and usage matters more. In this case, ATH starts getting priced like infrastructure instead of speculation. That brings price back toward the prior highs in the 8 to 10 cent range, implying roughly $1.5 to $2 billion in market cap. This scenario doesn't come from vibes, it comes from execution. Scenario 4 is the moonshot. Everything lines up. Explosive AI demand, clear differentiation, reliable performance at scale, full risk on market. In that environment, ATH pushes into the 15 to 25 cent range, putting market cap somewhere between $3 and $5 billion. Possible, rare, not the base case. And we always talk about the last scenario, the black swan, a market-wide risk event, regulatory shock, a pricing war from centralized cloud providers, or a real failure at scale. In that case, ATH doesn't get special treatment. It trades lower, liquidity dries up, and none of the upside scenarios matter until conditions change. That's the full map. No fantasy, no sugarcoating. ATH at 8/10 of a cent with a sub $200 million market cap is no longer priced for perfection. But every upside scenario still depends on one thing: proof. Now, before you go out and take a second on the house, there are two things you should know. First, none of this is financial advice. Second, just in case you're new here, Lulu is a peg. 4 hooves, 1 tail, excellent technical analysis. If you decide to take financial advice from an internet pig, that part is on you. Do your own research. Now that the numbers are on the board, let's finish this the right way with the final garage verdict. All right, now we put Aethir on the dyno and break this down piece by piece. No averages first. Every system gets its own pull. Technology, 8.5 out of 10. The tech is real. Coordinated GPU infrastructure with verification, routing, and enforcement is not easy. And Aethir is tackling a real bottleneck in AI and gaming compute. The architecture makes sense. The design choices are practical, and it's built around how high-performance computing actually works. This isn't experimental fluff. The reason it's not a 9 or 10 yet is simple. It still has to prove sustained performance at larger scale under real demand. Team and execution, 8 out of 10. The pit crew knows what they're doing. This is an experienced doxed team with backgrounds in infrastructure, gaming platforms, and enterprise systems where uptime actually matters. They're building, hiring engineers, and scaling deliberately. The reason this isn't higher yet is execution over time. Infrastructure projects earn their reputation by surviving stress, not by launching clean. Tokenomics and economic design, 7.5 out of 10. The fuel system is functional and honest. Tokenomics here are designed to bootstrap supply and enforce performance, not to be a front-end product. That's good. The trade-off is that ATH demand today is mostly indirect, and scheduled unlocks can create timing headwinds. Long-term strength depends on real usage replacing incentives. Solid design that's still in transition. Adoption and real usage, 7.5 out of 10.
There is real usage and real interest, especially from performance-sensitive builders and operators. This is not a ghost chain, but it's still early in the adoption curve. The workloads, customers, and repeat usage need to keep growing for this score to climb. The foundation is there, but this is where execution matters most. Competition and positioning, 8 out of 10. Aethir knows its lane. It's not trying to outmarket the big cloud providers or race every crypto compute project at once. It's positioning itself on reliability, coordination, and verified performance. That's a smart spot, but competition is intense and improving constantly. Staying ahead here requires continuous tuning. Risk profile, 7.5 out of 10.
The risks are real, but they're the right kind of risks. No scam signals, no disappearing founders, no shortcuts that only work on paper. The risks are execution-based, incentives, reliability at scale, decentralization over time, and competitive pressure. Manageable, but not trivial. Overall, Garage Dyno score, 8 out of 10. That puts Aethir in the tuned and worth watching category. Not a showroom toy, not a finished race car. A serious build that still has to prove it can go the distance. Now, before we roll this thing off the lift, remember, if you want the tools, breakdowns, and everything we use in the garage, head over to gurucryptogarage.guru. It's free. If you love it, great. If you hate it, tell us. That's how we make it better. If you have a project you want on the lift, drop it in the comments. Who knows? Yours may be the next one. And of course, this is not financial advice. Just the garage doing what it does best. Garage gang. Engines hot. Safety off. Let it rip.